We're joined in this portion of our program by Arda Nazerian. Arda is a first generation Armenian American and advisory committee member on Birthright Armenia and a board member for Armenian General Benevolent Union. She is joining us on our program. A very interesting background because she also has been involved as working as a teacher at Queens College in its honors business and liberal arts program, and at Columbia University, where she was a founding member of the advisory board for the master's program in strategic communications. It's nice to have you join us on our program.
It's nice to be here, Bob. Thank you for having me.
There's a lot of different things I want to get into in discussion with you, but one of the things I mentioned in that brief introduction is Birthright Armenia. And some of the people listening to us are probably going, what? What's Birthright Armenia? How do you describe what it is? And I guess what was the motivation behind launching it?
So Birthright Armenia was founded almost 20 years ago, and the motivation was simple. It is to connect diasporan Armenians with the homeland. And, you know, some people obviously have heard of Birthright Israel, and there are a number of other birthright nations. But the unique thing about Birthright Armenia was when it was founded, it was intended to be an immersive experience where the young people spend 2 months up to a year living with a host family, volunteering about 30 hours a week, and really getting to know the homeland. The other really interesting thing is it's intended for anyone who has one grandparent who is Armenian or was Armenian. So that means, you know, someone could be 25% Armenian and they are welcome into the program. So really the idea was give these young people exposure to the homeland, build a stronger connection. It benefits the homeland and it definitely benefits the young people who participate in it.
Some people may wonder why then, or why have specifically a birthright program. How do you answer that?
Because the definition of the word birthright is that you are entitled or you have a birthright to get to know your homeland. So regardless of where you are from, anywhere in the world, if you have just that little bit of Armenianness in your blood, you really have a birthright to meet your homeland, the citizens of the homeland, get to know it in a very personal way.
What would you say is the value of visiting the country and experiencing it firsthand?
So visiting versus birthright, because I'm going to make the distinction because there's a lot of people who go as tourists, and that's a really wonderful experience. But interestingly, the founding director, executive director of Birthright Armenia said it best. I remember in an interview, she said, this is not a Disneyland experience where you're going as a tourist, visiting for 10 days, seeing all the sites, which, by the way, I recommend to any of your listeners. And interestingly, tourism in Armenia is one of the hottest industries despite COVID and obviously travel bans and everything else. But before COVID, it was a destination. I remember when I was there last time, I met an Italian gentleman at a church in Odzun, which is one of the oldest churches. And he said, this is the seventh wonder of the world. I have waited my entire life to visit here. So visiting the nation, I encourage 100%. Visiting it as a Birthright Armenia participant is a different experience because you're living with a family, because you're participating in everyday life. And it's the opportunity to work, make a difference, because the Birthright Armenia participants are in almost every sector. You know, they volunteer across NGOs and they volunteer, you know, related to government and obviously some businesses. But they're really seeing it from the inside, and they're seeing it with an immersion or an intensity that it goes beyond the visit.
It's interesting because, you know, when you mentioned that at the beginning of that answer about this idea of it being kind of a destination, and probably a lot of people never would have imagined that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, why is we might have that kind of perception or misperception about the country?
Yeah, so I think if you ask most people where Armenia is, they might not even be able to tell you. But I will tell you, it's better now than when I was a child. you mentioned I'm a first generation Armenian American. My parents were immigrants, both came to this country for education for different reasons. And I probably will talk about them a little more because of the impact they've had on my life. But I used to have to explain, because my name, Arda, what kind of name is that? Armenian. What's Armenian? It's a country. It's one. And when I was little, it was one of the Soviet republics. Then after 1991, it's one of the former Soviet republics. Where is it located? Interestingly, most people don't know that most of Northeast Turkey was historic Armenia. So we were a much larger country going back, 1,000+ years. But we are surrounded by Iran. Iraq is close enough. Turkey, Azerbaijan. And so, people don't know. But then when they find out, and you find some of the facts, the topography, the historic significance, a fact that every Armenian will be able to tell you is it's the first Christian nation. Well, what's the history behind that? Then it becomes more interesting. And another curious fact is Edil Hovnanian, who founded Birthright Armenia, also founded Hike Armenia, because hikers will tell you it is one of the most fascinating nations to visit, hike through. So, most of the hikers who visit Armenia are not Armenian. So depending what your interest is, now there's wine, tourism. I mean, I'll touch on all of these, but it's a great question. Why? Because there's really something for everyone. So I like the pause.
It's interesting because, well, I always like to kind of reflect on what people have said and the way in which they've said it in interviews. And one of the things that comes across very clearly is I was listening carefully to what you were saying and thinking back to what you mentioned about being kind of quizzed as to what kind of name is Arda. Someone asks you that as a child. What goes through your mind? What went through your mind then?
So when I was little, English is my second language. I really, at home, we only spoke Armenian. When I went to kindergarten, and, Arda, strange name, and growing up in Rego Park, Queens, I used to just want a normal name. And at that time, when I had to explain, and by the way, Arda happens to be the name of one of the oldest Armenian princesses who, from what I'm told, and I don't know, I don't know if this was just because of my personality, was a precocious, very smart, strong young woman. And so until I was probably around 17 or 18, I didn't like it. And now I love it. And from the time I was able to, be a confident young professional, and you get to a point, and I will tell you, many Armenians are like this, give me the opportunity to explain. And, we didn't call them elevator pitches back then. Now they're called elevator pitches. But in 45 seconds, I can tell you a lot about my name, my family, my upbringing, and the impact it has on me as an American. And people will get off the elevator saying, wow, I didn't know that. And I think that's kind of cool.
Birthright Armenia. One of the thoughts I had heading into our discussion today, and I imagine this question possibly comes up at times, is does it differentiate itself from other birthright programs?
When it was founded, absolutely, because of the duration of it. It also, obviously there's a lot of information at birthrightarmenia.org for people who are interested. But the application, there's no fee. The cost of the program, it's really out-of-pocket costs, even to the extent of air travel costs if the young person stays long enough. So I think it's, if this young person stays more than 3 months, even the air travel is covered. Below, shorter than that, it's covered partially. But it was intended to be inclusive. It was intended to encourage every Armenian. And like I said, with just one grandparent. So, I have to say one of the best things about our community is that most of us don't differentiate between 100% or 50% or 25%. If you feel Armenian, we embrace you. And I think that's one of the differentiating factors is the lack of a cost and also the duration. I mean, 10 days is different than 2 months. And, we have many birthwriters who stay up to a year and they're welcomed by their host families. And, I was just talking to somebody recently who just went back for her birthright sister's wedding. So they become family. And that's another thing is, and frankly, your listeners are of all ethnicities, and it has been growing. The birthright blank trend has been growing, where other countries are saying we want a program similar to this.
Right.
And I give credit to Birthright Israel because it started that trend, and many of my students have participated in it. Where they go for 10 days and they get to connect with their homeland, and I'm sure most go back.
You mentioned the website birthrightarmenia.org. Now, is that where somebody would go to apply for the program?
Yes, and it's a pretty simple process.
And is there a specific age range?
I mean, the general age range is 22 to 25, let's say. It's really meant for people who are post-college age, and it might be someone didn't go to college, but it's really intended for young adults. Not so much high school kids. It's not meant for that at all, because really the other thing it does is it exposes participants to what they might want to be when they grow up. I mean, it could be that, one person goes into college and thinks they want to do something, then they end up in the Birthright Armenia and they're actually working alongside people in the nonprofit sector or in the tech sector. And suddenly their interests evolve. And I will tell you, as a college teacher, more so than a graduate school teacher, that's the best gift you can give young people is exposure, experience, awareness. Another thing I love about Birthright is the people who founded it and run it are some of the most interesting, passionate, but pragmatic people you will meet. And, and the program's participants, I've gotten to know so many of them so well. They are across industries and different degrees of knowledge of whatever it is, but the common denominator is the connection to Armenia. And then just one other point I want to make, Bob, because I think a lot of people don't know Armenia well, but more do now, which is gratifying. But Armenia has to be thought of as a global nation. A lot of countries are thought of as the homeland and then the diaspora. And I'm going to put on my AGBU hat for a second. We started defining Armenia as a global nation and as global Armenians, meaning it is the nation, it is the diaspora, and it's also the church, because faith is something that is foundational, and it's the only thing that has sustained us for centuries of, persecution and, division and fighting and whatever. Our church has been, our faith has really been something that has sustained us. So the global nation benefits from having more global Armenians, and we welcome, like I said, if you feel Armenian, you are a global Armenian and you are part of our nation.
A natural question that would come to mind, I think, in a discussion like this, and I should mention for those of you who've just joined us in our discussion, we're talking with Arda Nazerian on our program. She's a first-generation Armenian American and advisory committee member on Birthright Armenia, a board member for AGBU, the Armenian General Benevolent Union. She's joining us on our program and sharing information. By the way, birthrightarmenia.org, a website mentioned earlier in this discussion. Is it necessary for someone to speak Armenian to be part of the program?
Absolutely not. And in fact, that is an important discussion / debate, Armenians raise sometime. Do you need to speak Armenian to identify as an Armenian? And people have different opinions on that. My personal opinion is no, but as part of Birthright Armenia, there are classes in Armenian that the participants take at no cost. And then obviously living with a host family, being immersed in the country and the culture, it's one of the benefits of spending 2 months to 12 months or however long participants spend there. So the other thing, which is an interesting did you know fact, is there's actually the Western dialect and the Eastern dialect. So I am fluent in the Western dialect. I was raised in a home where my parents spoke Armenian. And at the time I would get frustrated, but now I'm grateful for it because I read, I write. I forced my 2 grown kids to go to Armenian school, and we tried to speak at home. And now they're grateful for that too, which they weren't thrilled on Saturday mornings when they'd have to wake up early for another day of school. And then Sundays, they went to Sunday school, which I teach now. They didn't love it then, but they love it now. So, it's an interesting evolution of how things happen. But the language, it's a really interesting language. There's nothing like it. We have 38 characters. And you can, whereas in English, we have the CH sound for ch, there's one letter for that. So it's a really unique alphabet language. It's beautiful. It's difficult. But Birthright Armenia participants actually learn the language when they're there, but there's no requirement that they speak it going in.
What's the strongest aspect of difference between those 2 dialects that you mentioned? I'm intrigued by that.
Oh, I wish I were a linguist and I could tell you. It's and there are some people who will say when they go to Armenia at first, they don't even understand. But because we're such a communicative, warm people, we make people understand pretty quickly. There's the connection of words. There's different words for different objects and things. And there's just a tone, it's just a tonation thing, a tonality thing, which I'm going to sound very non-linguist right now. But there's different words. There's different composition, different sentence composition. So word composition, sentence composition. And yet through it all, I will say we understand each other. And the longer we spend there, we're able to really communicate just fine. You talk about nonverbal communication, which is part of what I teach, and we're really good at that. And the other thing people will find when they travel to Armenia, either as a visitor, as a part of Birthright Armenia, they will find the warmth. So the smiles, the eyes, the embrace is something that I think breaks through any language barrier.
It's so interesting hearing you say that, because one of the things that I do outside of working, obviously, for this company and for the radio show, is I teach communication classes. And it's interesting when you just mentioned nonverbal communication, because I consider myself to be a student of that form of communication. Just because, as I tell students every semester, that's the majority of communication that we do is nonverbal. And every semester when I say that, I get completely blank stares in response.
Can I ask where you teach?
I teach at one of the county colleges in New Jersey. And in the past, at one point I had taught up in the Bronx at College of Mount St. Vincent and Manhattan College for a number of years also. And I love the experience.
It is. And I was going to say, there's an expression I love, which is to teach is to learn again. And every semester with my Queens College students, I learn so much because there's a lot of cultural diversity and, the whole issue of cultural competence. And every day or every class, something comes up. And sometimes nonverbal communication in one culture is markedly different than another culture. And it's great to tell students that, look, I learned too. But interestingly, and I'm sure you've seen this, Bob, is the how much it's changing over time, with more people focused on their phones, not as much in-person communication. COVID has been a real downer for, I think, students learning. But nonverbal communication. And so cultures that are high context, Armenia would be one of them. We say a lot with our faces. We say a lot with our smiles and our eyes. Pain comes through in facial expressions, right? And but yes, that's how we communicate between Eastern and Western Armenian.
It's very interesting that that's um, such a strong aspect of that communication process between the different dialects. So thank you. Again, it was my curiosity based on what you said. Natural thought process in my mind, the way I think. When we talk about Armenia, and again, I'm trying to do this from the standpoint of people who are listening to the discussion who they may not have a clue as to where Armenia is or anything about it. Who would you say, or who would you point to as some notable or famous, or shall I say even popular, Armenian Americans?
We have so many. I can start with, probably the most famous one is Kim Kardashian, who has actually been an activist on issues related to the Armenian community and history and current events. In fact, she visited the AGBU office when she traveled to Armenia a few years ago. We had launched a women's empowerment program. So we have women entrepreneurs, we're teaching women coding. There's a whole change makers like civic engagement component. She actually visited some of the women and got to know them. So the Kim Kardashian we all see here was significantly different than the Kim Kardashian there. And when she has the millions and millions of followers on social media, it helps to have someone like that. But the most recent example I'll give you is two people in biotech and medicine. The winner of this year's Nobel Prize in Medicine is not a household name, but Arda Nazerian, who's actually an alumni of AGBUs. Noubar Afeyan is the founder of Moderna with the vaccine, and really a brilliant mind in the biotech world. The actor Eric Bogosian, Peter Balakian, Pulitzer Prize winner in poetry, William Saroyan, Alan Hovhaness, the musician, the chef Jeffrey Zakarian. So I could go, and then there's household things like the inventor of the Delta faucet, the concept of hot and cold water coming out of one spout was a gentleman named Alex Manoogian in Masco Corporation based in Michigan. Stephen Mugar, founder of Star Markets in New England. His daughter Carolyn Mugar was the founder of Farm Aid, which was a big movement in the 80s. Right. So, Mark Hoplamazian is the CEO of Hyatt Corporation. James Tufenkian is the founder of Tufenkian Rugs, and he has a whole series of boutique hotels in Armenia now. So, I could just go on and on.
Interesting. How many Americans are actually in Armenia?
I don't know. And it's not that easy to find out. I actually was curious about that myself and spoke to someone in the Ministry of Diaspora and Affairs a while ago about that. And, we know, well, let's start with Birthright Armenia. Birthright Armenian participants have come from about 60 countries. About 15% of them have repatriated and are living there now. But probably close to 40% of them have returned multiple times for extended periods of time, even if they haven't repatriated. Many of them are Americans in Armenia. There are, tech, we have multiple unicorns, right? Tech companies where they're from America, but they go to Armenia because the IT industry there is so full of young people, bright people that they want to employ. So they set up offices there. So, to know specifically, I mean, the estimate is there's roughly, 3 million people in Armenia. Most of them are in Yerevan, the capital. I think it's also a certain fluidity to it in terms of how many are of any one particular ethnicity. And Western Europeans are also repatriates to Armenia. I just heard of a case of a doctor from California who repatriated there in the last year. So, anecdotally, I hear about it. I don't think anyone there is keeping the statistics yet. There is an organization called Repat Armenia, which, interestingly, the founder of Birthright Armenia, Edil, also, I believe she chairs that. And there is an interest in finding out. And, the other thing about the Armenian community is that because of the genocide in 1915, they went all over the world. And, there have been pretty significant communities in the Middle East, in Western Europe, obviously in the US. And now, when the Beirut blast happened in 2020, a lot of people's livelihood was eliminated because of that, and obviously the economy in that country. So now there's Lebanese Armenians repatriating to Armenia after the civil war in Syria over almost a decade. Many Syrian Armenians repatriated to Armenia. They don't so much leave America to go there for those same reasons, thankfully, but for different reasons. And I speak to Birthright Armenia alumni, and the stories fascinate me. And especially when you're young, in your 20s, and you have that positive experience Birthright Armenia has given you, the motivation to do something meaningful with your life is really there. Mm-hmm. And I love that. And I have kids close to that age now. And I love that they live through experiences and not material wants, which is something else. It's not exclusive to the Armenian community. But I see a lot of Armenians who have purpose in their life. And that purpose comes in many forms. So even with the AGBU Empower Her program, we have women from across the diaspora, and I'm talking dozens of countries, who volunteer their time to do workshops with, mentor these Armenian entrepreneurs, the women. So, it's kind of heartwarming, and it makes us realize that people see something bigger than themselves, which is great.
That is great. You mentioned the capital city a couple moments ago, and my own curiosity, what's it like?
I would compare it to any Western European or American metropolis. Excellent restaurants, great nightlife, unbelievable culture, and the advantage of the beautiful topography within 45 minutes or an hour of the city, if not less. So the opportunity to balance city living with, really nice outdoor life. And then some of the oldest churches, monasteries, buildings anywhere in the world are in Armenia. So it has the best of several worlds. But I would love if you were able to go there and your eyes would be wide open. You'd say, wow, I feel like I'm in Europe, or I feel like I'm in, a major American city. So that's what Yerevan is. And the great thing is, look, because of the internet now, anyone could just log on and get live video at any point during the day and say, wow, I can't believe that's in Armenia, former Soviet Republic, in the middle of where it is. And that's also, I think, attests to the Armenian people.
We're in a discussion, an important one, and a good one too. It's a nice exchange of information's taking place, talking with Arda Nazerian on our program. She's a first-generation Armenian American and advisory committee member on Birthright Armenia, which is at birthrightarmenia.org. And she's a board member of AGBU, the Armenian General Benevolent Union. She's been kind enough to join us on our program. I didn't ask you at the beginning of our discussion, you mentioned a couple of different times. How do you describe what AGBU is?
So AGBU is the oldest and largest philanthropic organization. It was founded about 115 years ago, and it has 4 core pillars, which is education, culture, humanitarian, and socioeconomic development. So the women's program I was talking about clearly falls under social and economic development. And really, AGBU was born out of the genocide and the founders' recognition that we had to help humanitarian, one of the core pillars, orphans and women and families who were displaced. And interestingly, the core mission of AGBU has not changed in 115 years. What's evolved is how we implement that mission. So we have chapters across the world. We have offices in several places, including Armenia, big offices, Western United States, obviously Europe, and then Armenia. And we do everything. I mean, scholarships, internship programs, obviously empowerment programs. We have children's centers in Armenia, and anytime the need has arisen, AGBU has been the organization that's responded with those different pillars that I mentioned. So after, the earthquake in 1988, I think most of your listeners who are alive then would remember it. AGB was one of the first organizations in helping with refrigeration and helping with schools and rebuilding and all of that kind of the services that were needed. After independence, we were there again. And so it's, one of these organizations that has stood the test of time. And I couldn't be prouder than to be involved with it in a really meaningful way.
One thing we haven't touched upon that I'd read in preparation for our discussion today was about the literacy rate in Armenia. And I found that to be very impressive, because the figure I read was a 99% literacy rate. I mean, that's almost unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
How, first of all, I guess, how proud are the people there of that? And what does that do for the country, basically, on the world stage?
Well, Armenians are smart. And you asked me before about some of the famous Armenians. And I think I listed some of them. And, obviously, intelligence is core, but really a core value is education. So I said to you, both my parents, immigrants to the US, both came for education. My dad, his family after the genocide went to Jerusalem. So he was born and raised in the old city of Jerusalem. And my mom's family went to Beirut. So just as an example, my mom graduated from AUB, American University of Beirut, and received a full scholarship to come to the US to get her master's at New England Conservatory of Music. She got a master's in education in music, but before that, she went on a study trip, 11,000 miles through the United States in the late 1950s.
That's a heck of a trip.
Exactly. And it was unheard of for a woman from the Middle East to come to the US for something like that. And I would say her parents were old fashioned, and yet her father said, if it's for education, you do it.
Wow.
And so education is instilled in Armenians from the youngest age. So look at chess, Garry Kasparov, right? Everyone knows his name, but there are chess champions or chess masters starting as young as, teenage years from Armenia. So, education, inquisitiveness, curiosity. So you don't get to be the names I mentioned before without having something in you that says, let me help, let me be the best, let me share my education. And that's why, so the literacy rate of 99%, I was going to say, we might say, why isn't it 100%?
Mm. And how important is it to keep awareness / knowledge of the genocide and what took place?
Very.
Alive.
I mean, it's very important, but we have to think of it two ways. Historically, it is one of the most significant events that has taken place. So obviously, President Biden finally acknowledging it was huge. And coincidentally, Senator Dole, who recently passed away, he was from Kansas.
Right.
And why was he a champion of genocide recognition when he was in a leadership position in the Senate? It started because the doctor who saved his life, who was a relative of my dad's and actually did surgery on my mom, he learned about it from Dr. Kalikian. And he said to him, I will make it my purpose to get the truth told. So all our kids, generations learn about it. But the sad thing is, we have very few survivors left. Fortunately, there are institutions that have documented the stories. Denial of any horrible event is wrong for everyone. It is not just about the Armenian people. And that's the other thing, is we really, all of us need to, share stories, good and bad, and acknowledge the truth and move on. So the point I want to make with, the genocide, 2015 was the centennial. And most Armenians said, you know what, we will keep fighting for genocide recognition, which we've gotten now from the US. But in the meantime, we're going to keep moving forward because we have accomplished so much. We have so much to be proud of. And the best lesson for anyone is success. moving, doing things that help the rest of the world, because so many non-Armenians helped the Armenians 100 years ago, that's the best we can do for everyone else. So, we teach our young people, it's taught in our churches and our schools and everything else. And fortunately, many states have included them in the curriculum. And so, we don't wallow in it. We have built forward from it.
And the significance of Armenia being the first country to adopt Christianity.
Yeah, so that's a fact that most people will know, so interestingly, and this is where history comes in. So I was saying to you, visit Armenia, there's so much to see. This is a history lesson too. So there was, St. Gregory the Illuminator was the one who convinced King Dertad, who was the king of Armenia, who was a pagan. And actually, St. Gregory the Illuminator was put in a pit in Horvirab, which is one of the sites you would visit when you visit Armenia, for around 13 years as punishment for telling the pagan king to adopt Christianity. But over the years, King Dertad went a little crazy, and his sister actually convinced the king to let St. Gregory come and see him. He wasn't a saint at that time. And St. Gregory was able to heal him and convince him about Christianity, about Jesus' story. And that is how Christianity was adopted. And another bit of information that's kind of an interesting fact is at the Vatican, there is a large statue of St. Gregory the Illuminator. So, this was 301 AD when King Dertad adopted Christianity for the nation. The Roman Empire, which most people think that came first, that was, I think, around 380 AD. So it was a number of years later. And then obviously after that, Christianity spread. But that's the story of why. And so I say one of the core values, yes, education, but faith. Faith is critical, to our survival. And, then there's a reason. I mean, I work, I teach, I volunteer for a couple of great organizations, and I teach Sunday school because I love teaching high school kids about faith, about the significance of it. And that kind of, I think, says something.
How responsive are they, those kids?
Oh, I love it. How responsive they respond. You get challenged, which I think is a core tenet of faith, is to be able to deal with challenges. We live in a world where anyone of faith will sometimes say, there's a book, When God Doesn't Make Sense. And sometimes, I remember hearing a sermon after 9/11 and saying, everyone's saying, how does God let that happen? All these good people. And I was downtown, and it was horrible. I was actually in the World Trade Center in 1993 with the first bombing too. And you say, how could that happen? And a priest said, this shows us evil exists in the world. So when you tell high school students, high school age kids, good versus evil, that's not just Garden of Eden story. That's like the world we live in. So we need more good people to beat down evil. And really what faith does is it gives us something to hold on to during the not so good times when we encounter evil. And that can happen in so many ways. I mean, simple accidents we see, and loss of life, and just things like that. So you say, how do they respond? Sometimes they want to hear something to explain what goes on in the world.
I didn't ask you in this discussion, I'd be remiss if I did not, when you're talking about Armenia, because of the world in which we live. A natural question for some of the folks listening to our discussion today is, well, how safe is Armenia?
Very. I don't have the exact crime rates, but anything I've ever seen is it's well below other, countries, major cities, and especially in Europe and the US. I'm not being Pollyannish in saying that the Armenians are generally good people. And so strangers go to Armenia and they leave as friends, non-Armenian strangers, people who go. So it's people tend to be more helpful. So crime, I don't want to jinx it, but crime is not a problem.
Is it a natural question that people ask though when you're talking about
No, I think,
Armenia? Yeah.
well, no, I would say only because it's an unknown. So you say,
Yes.
oh,
Yes.
Armenia, where is it? What's it
Hmm.
like? What are the people like? So in that way, but again, I think if you just saw what the city of Yerevan is like, that question would not be an obvious one to be asked.
Hmm.
And I've talked to, we have our own AGBU staff there. These people are terrific and they are just, proud and welcoming. And I will tell you, in 2020, the war showed a side of the Armenian people where, despite loss and difficulties and everything, they worked harder and they welcomed more. And look, I will even use Birthright Armenia as an example. Armenia struggled with COVID. Obviously, post-war, it wasn't the first place people might think to go. And the number of applicants to Birthright Armenia is up. And it, by the way, it increases every year, but there was no skipping that step. There was no decline, no dip, no nothing. And the number of Birthright Armenia participants returning to Armenia to either help after the war, to support, to start businesses, also grows every year. So that says something because, young people are smart. Young people go where there's opportunity, where they see potential, where they know they're going to have fun. And so that's what the Armenian story is it's not a country of victims. This is a country of resilience, of people who say, you know what, that wasn't fair, that wasn't right. So how can I fix it? And I heard a great expression from a Birthright Armenian alumni who said to me, use your pain to build something. Use your pain to heal. And I say in my own professional work, it's like no problem without a solution. It's fine if we want to complain a little, but an old boss of mine once gave me a no whining sign, which I would show if this were TV, and I keep it behind my desk because don't whine. We can be unhappy, we can be frustrated, we can be angry, but let's figure out how to build something. Yeah, so that to me is instructional about the Armenian people.
What a wonderful discussion. Very interesting exchange of information. Learned an awful lot, as I'm sure a lot of the people listening to our discussion today have as well. Arda Nazerian, very kind in talking with us on our program. First generation Armenian American and advisory committee member on Birthright Armenia, board member for AGBU. For people who are listening to our discussion today, Arda, perhaps want more information on some of the things we've talked about, where would you direct them online?
I would say absolutely agbu.org, birthrightarmenia.org, or Google Armenia, famous Armenians, Armenia interesting facts, visiting Yerevan, historic significance of Armenia. Google is my favorite thing because we can learn so much in a matter of minutes. So I would really encourage people to just, look into it. I mean, thank you, Bob, for the opportunity. I've loved the discussion. I love your questions. But I love it when people learn about Armenia, the Armenian people, all of this, because, it's just such a great story to tell.
It is. Thank you very much for your time. Be well. Stay healthy.
Thank you, Bob. Same to you.
Hopefully you enjoyed that interesting discussion. We always have some fun on our program on Sunday mornings. We'll join you at 6 next Sunday morning. Right now, after our look around the sporting world and our top of the hour sports flash, Rick Wolf is standing by. Natalie attired that he is for this hour on a Sunday morning. He's got the Sports Edge program. Along at 8 o'clock, it's the NFL preview. 8:30, You Better You Bet. And at 9 o'clock, the dynamic duo is around. Malusis and Deal, football Sunday time. You're on the Fan.